While he waits for jury deliberations in his New York election interference trial to begin, Donald Trump hit the campaign trail with a rally in the South Bronx. On Thursday, Trump took the stage in one of the most Democratic counties in the country and attempted to woo black and brown voters by slamming the black and brown immigrants who've settled in the city.
And these millions and millions of people that are coming into our country, the biggest impact and the biggest negative impact is against our black population and our Hispanic population, who are losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing everything they can lose.
And in another dubious attempt to enhance his credentials with voters of color, Trump invited rappers Chef G and Sleepy Hollow on stage. Both rappers face charges in a sweeping gang case, and one faces attempted murder charges. Come on now. Joining me now, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. Okay, this first question is to both of you. Here are what some counter-demonstrators at the rally had to say about Trump's attempt to connect with voters in the Bronx. Watch this.
Nobody who is authentically from the Bronx is willing to co-sign hatred and xenophobia and misogyny and all of the things that this guy represents.
Let Donald Trump know that he is not welcome in the Bronx.
Do you think there's any people you know in the Bronx or friends that would consider voting for him?
No, I don't know anyone that consider voting for him.
So, okay, Ashley, I'm going to come to you first on this, but was Trump really there to court black and brown votes, or was that really about making white voters more comfortable with voting for him?
No, I think it was really twofold. One is to sow doubt about Democrats' commitment to the black and brown community. And we've seen over time, dating back to 2016, when Trump said, what do you have to lose? Right. And ever since that moment, he's ticked up in terms of percentage of black voters from 6% to 8% to 10%. So to some degree, it's actually working. But I would also say the second thing that he's trying to achieve is creating this permission structure for black folks and brown folks to stay home, to say pox on both of your houses. You know, some people buy into the grievance argument, but that's really what it's about, is just peeling off a small percentage and sowing that doubt so people stay home and contributes to the apathy.
There's pox on just one house from my point of view. Susan, what do you think?
Well, a few things. One, let's remember this rally was done when Donald Trump, or organized when Donald Trump thought he'd be in court. So he needed something else to do while he was going to, in theory, be in court. He wasn't. But there are a few things that really should be noted about the Bronx. First of all, last year was the first time in 40 years that a city council member was elected from the Bronx who was a Republican.
Right.
Going back to 2016 to 2020, Donald Trump did 7 points better than he in comparison. But none of this is to say Donald Trump is going to win the Bronx, win New York, or anything like that. Let's take that off the table. But it should show something, especially that win in the city council, that people do look at their current government, and if they are not happy at the city, state, or federal level, they'll try something else. And what we're seeing now in the polling is that especially black men are looking away from Joe Biden. They are going to Donald Trump in small numbers. But when we're talking about margins in Atlanta or Milwaukee, those votes matter.
Right, or Cleveland. Go ahead,
Absolutely.
Ashley.
I would just add one thing. Republicans play a long game compared to Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a long game strategy. I've been arguing from the White House on the campaign that Democrats should take the same strategy. We should be going to places like Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the union's always been run by Republicans, and we should go to those places and make the case and say, what do you have to lose? You know, you've been in the poorest state run by Republicans. What do you have to lose? Consider an alternative option. And we've not yet done that, but we need to start playing the long game as Republicans do.
Well, long game, not just presidential, because to your point, governors, state legislatures,
I mean, look at Georgia's
and things like that. Right. Susan, No, I'm sorry, Ashley. I mean, President Biden's campaign revealed that it plans to adopt a more aggressive approach with Donald Trump after the Manhattan trial ends. Just how hard should the president and the campaign go once the trial is over?
Well, I mean, I think they're adopting an aggressive posture now, today. I mean, just this week, they've released two really, I think, edgy and biting ads that paint Donald Trump for having a penchant for racism, but also paint him as someone who's committed to, undermining the Constitution on day one, serving as a dictator, someone who's twice tried to cheat the election and overturn the government. I mean, so I think that they're taking an aggressive posture now. I think that what they're going to do after the case is the question that's on the table is whether or not they characterize him as convicted or not convicted. I think that is the real question. But they are aggressively now targeting black and brown voters as well as Nikki Haley voters with these messages about who Donald Trump actually is.
Look, if he gets convicted, they better say convicted felon, because it would be the truth. So, Susan, I'm going to switch gears because tonight Trump is planning to speak at the Libertarian National Convention in order to thwart, that's such a hard word to say, RFK Jr.'s campaign. Is this a further indication that Trump views RFK Jr. as a real threat?
Absolutely, but it was a smart campaign maneuver, even though he will probably be greeted with boos. If he can prevent RFK Jr. from getting the Libertarian line, that will be a huge, significant win for Trump or Biden, depending on which state and which demographics you're talking about. Because the important thing about the Libertarian Party and why they're both fighting for it is it gives ballot access in nearly every state. I don't think they'll hit 50 this year. It may be 46, 48. But RFK Jr. is nowhere close to that. So I think Trump went in there, even if they don't give it to him, just not to give it to RFK Jr.
Ashley, in the couple minutes that we have left, we would be remiss if we did not point out the fact that today is the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis. Where are we when it comes to criminal justice reform? And do you think the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act will ever make it through Congress? Maybe not this particular Congress, but if Democrats retake the House in the next Congress, will we have to wait that long?
Yeah, I mean, that was an incredible time in American history.
4 years.
Yeah, not just in terms of the loss and the murder of George Floyd, but also, people around the world were standing in solidarity about the value of Black lives. I was running communications for Pelosi at the time and was charged with the strategy around getting the bill passed. We passed it in 30 days, the fastest bill we've ever passed. But the problem is, and this is what's rarely talked about, is the civil rights groups, many of the people who come on your show talking about Black lives actually walked away from the bill. And my point to them is, if we don't take the bird in the hand, we're actually going to, someone else is going to have to die in more dramatic fashion to get that level of momentum around a bill. Tyree Nichols died. The president went during his State of the Union, made some really remarkable statements about the value of his life and said, something good has to come out of this. And the reality is nothing good really has come out of it. To Biden's credit, he's passed some executive orders that outlaw chokeholds and other aspects of the George Floyd bill. But executive orders are at the whim of the president. We need to codify it into law. And I think the problem here is this is a great vulnerability for the president. He nor the vice president have really done anything to push legislation at the federal level to push Congress to pass this bill. So I think it's going to continue to be a drag on him, but it continues to contribute to this perception that Democrats show up to the Black community just to get our votes and just gives us lip service and doesn't actually push legislation that benefits us.
Well, I'll tell you this much. The Biden-Harris campaign has been firing on all cylinders, going to Black voters. And folks need to understand that the president and vice president can pound the podium as much as they want, but if they don't have a House and they don't have a Senate willing to go along, ain't nothing going to get done.
Absolutely.
Ashley Etienne, Susan Del Percio, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday Show. Joining me now, Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She's a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congresswoman Crockett, welcome back to the Saturday Show. You signed the letter calling for Justice Alito to recuse himself after news broke of the first flag.
Yeah.
Your reaction now that there's been a second flag?
Listen, we're not going to play with this. We know who Alito is. He's not trying to hide who he is. I mean, I know he tried to hide behind his wife during the first incident, but he has nothing to say about this second incident. You know, I had my little drama that happened in oversight. Unfortunately, what wasn't covered was that the court reform task force was rolled out the exact same week. And in that task force, we've got three major things that we're looking at. We're looking at, number one, term limits. No more than 18 years. We're also looking at expanding the court because we know right now that we literally cannot trust these folk. And the last thing that we're looking at is making sure that there's some actual ethics reform. So we have three bills that we're pushing forward with. We're trying to educate the rest of our colleagues on it, and we're trying to hopefully get some movement in the House, and then, you know, we just pray about the Senate.
Okay, so this gets to something that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said this week. He said if the Supreme Court doesn't, quote, get its act under control, Congress should impose an ethics code. But is that going to take a new Congress and a new Congress with a Democratic majority to get those three bills you're talking about through?
Absolutely. I just don't think that we have the courage on the other side. Oddly enough, if we still had one of our Freedom Caucus members, Ken Buck, he may have actually joined in because he is a former prosecutor. So one of the issues that he had with dealing with the folk in the House is that he did not feel like there was a legal pathway to impeachment in the first place. And he felt as if his colleagues were diminishing the institution by playing games with trying to impeach the president by going out and impeaching Secretary Mayorkas and things like that. And so he, in my opinion, has a little bit more respect for the law. The rest of them, there may be some that respect the law, but they don't have the guts to stand up and do what's right.
Do you think Justice Alito, I've heard some people say that Justice Alito should be impeached. Would that go too far?
No, I don't think it would.
You don't think that would open a Pandora's box?
The box is already open, Jonathan. They just don't have control of the Senate as well as control of the White House. Although the impeachment is just the Senate. But listen, I don't think that we'll have the filibuster if the Republicans get a hold of the Senate again. You know, Democrats hide behind so many traditions, not laws, but traditions, even when we start talking about appointments to the courts. I mean, it's amazing that the president has been able to do what he's done. But guess what? We've got a ton of vacancies in the state of Texas, and we can't get them because of blue slips. Blue slips are a tradition. They are not law. And basically what we see in the South, where a lot of these terrible cases are coming from, is Republican senators say, no, you can't have any appointments in our state. We're going to hold on until a Republican is in. And then they decide to forum shop and send all their crazy cases to the crazy judges in the South and then take it up through the Fifth Circuit. And then we know what happens when it gets to the Supreme Court.
Well, right. And that gets to what I was going to ask you, because it's not just the High Court, the Supreme Court that we're talking about. We're talking about folks needing to worry about those federal appointments. And you're alluding to this, but in your home state of Texas, it was a Trump-appointed federal judge who helped send abortion back to the Supreme Court in the mifepristone case.
Yeah, with no legal basis. I don't know how this guy made it to the court. He doesn't sound like he's that intelligent, or he pretended not to be intelligent. I'm not really sure. But the base is, I mean, we're talking about a case where there was no standing. And for those at home that don't understand, standing is like first grade for lawyers, right? Like, it's like, this is the first thing you learn. You somehow have to be harmed before you can go holler at the court, right? And so we're talking about people that literally have nothing to do with mifepristone. Were like, you know what? I feel this. And so I'm going to bring this case. It should have been shut down immediately, but it did not end up happening.
I love that. If you are not harmed by the case, you cannot holler at the court. That's just genius. All right. So can we just go back and talk about the Supreme Court? Because I'm just wondering, does Supreme Court, what's his name?
Alito.
Chief Justice. I'm sorry. The Chief Justice.
Yes.
Does Chief Justice John Roberts actually have control of this court?
I would argue that there's no control anytime MAGA is in the room. That's just the bottom line. And while Alito and while Thomas may not have come up through MAGA Amy Coney Barrett did, along with Kavanaugh. We know that there's a lot of MAGA in the room. And Alito and Thomas came in and they wanted to be MAGA. They really did. But that's not where the Republican Party was at the time. And so now you're looking at a court. I mean, Roberts is usually who we look at for the swing. I mean, this is bad. Like, this is really, really bad. And the fact that Amy Coney Barrett may actually go with the mifepristone case, I was like, you finally woke up and realized you were a woman, or that you got children and that your children may be affected. Like, I'm not really sure what woke her up and made her decide that, okay, maybe I don't need to go this way. But we appreciate her if she does the right thing.
I was going to say, we don't have a judgment yet.
It was all
ruling.
the questioning. The questioning made it seem like she was on the right track. But, you know, we never know until it actually goes down. But in addition to that, you know, Republicans are really getting what they asked for, which is actually too much, because, like, they're not really good at policy, right? Like, that's why when they ask Donald Trump, they say, hey, what is your policy on repro? And he's like, oh, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you. How are you running to be the president of the United States and you don't have an opinion? You do have an opinion. Oh, you just don't want to talk about it because you know it's not popular. And for people that can't read the tea leaves, listen, the little rights that you do have left in California and New York or whatever other states have decided, Kansas, Ohio, he trying to say, I'm going to snatch those from you, too. So you better pay attention to what he's not saying.
Those tea leaves are the size of maple leaves. Let's just put it that way. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of the great state of Texas, thank you very much for coming back to the Saturday Show.
Absolutely.
Joining me now, Jon Meacham, the Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt. He occasionally advises President Biden on historical matters and major speeches. He's the author of The Call to Serve, a visual biography of George H.W. Bush, which comes out this Tuesday. Jon, thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday Show. Talk about why it is an affront to the fallen that a former president and potential future president is praising authoritarians and parroting Nazi slogans as part of his campaign.
Well, you know, there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. And that may sound overly dorky, but it's incredibly relevant to where we are now, as you've just laid out. Patriotism is allegiance to an idea, to a set of principles. In the United States, our best patriotic instincts is an allegiance. Finds its expression in an allegiance to the Declaration of Independence as our mission statement. The Constitution, as it's been said, is our user's guide. Nationalism, however, is about allegiance and protection and privileging of your own kind, of people who look like you, people who were born where you were born, co-religionists, that there's a sameness to it. And it doesn't necessarily involve principle. The marvelous thing about American democracy is that, in fact, we have managed to, despite all of our imperfections, put the principle that all men are created equal, the most important sentence ever originally rendered in English by Thomas Jefferson. We have put that sentence at the heart of the national experiment. And the men and the women whom we commemorate today, tomorrow, and whenever we ponder this remarkable democratic lowercase d system that's enabled us to live lives of consequence and liberty, whenever we think about them, we are imagining people, we are commemorating people who were willing to die for that principle, not for just people who looked like them, but for a principle that we were all created equal. And to introduce and promulgate and defend and repeat, all of which President Trump and his followers have done, a vernacular of dictatorship and authoritarianism and autocracy is to undermine the very system that they wish to represent. And to my mind, it is a choice we're making to that 49 to 50% of the country, for sundry reasons, are choosing to enable this authoritarian movement. And it's incumbent, therefore, on everybody else to stand up against it.
Right. And to that point, Jon, you know what worries me? That a sizable chunk of the American electorate appears ready to give up on democracy, including elected officials like Senator Vance, who's out there praising authoritarians. So talk me off the ledge if you think I'm worrying too much.
No, I don't jump, but stay on the ledge, because by being on the ledge, you will continue to tell the story of what American democracy should be. And if you tell that story, that's the only way we have, is to tell the story and to show how democracy, in fact, delivers for people. You're not at all wrong to be terrified about this. This is also a country, let's be clear, that for far more of its years of existence, what lived outside of compliance with the Declaration of Independence than we have lived inside compliance, right? You and I have talked about this before. This country wasn't founded in 1619 or 1776. This country was founded in 1965.
Yep.
When there was the ballot box was actually integrated, and President Johnson signed the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that removed those racist 1920s quotas that tended to only allow and favored Northern Europeans. So we're a very young country. We're a very young democracy. And so you have to stay on the ledge and keep pointing out the things you pointed out.
Yeah, American democracy is only 2 years older than I am. I am 50. I was born in 67. You know, I'm going to get you on one more thing, because Trump has cranked up his propensity for projection lately and is trying to turn President Biden's attacks on Trump against him. Listen to what he said Trump said at the Libertarian Conference last night.
Joe Biden's radical left Democrat Party is a fascist movement that wants to throw you in jail. The fact is that Joe Biden is a threat to democracy.
You know, John, Trump is engaged in all this projection, as the New York Times reports that he has cast doubt on the election results earlier and more often with each campaign. What's Trump up to with this?
Exactly that. And it's working, by the way. The polling shows that an extraordinary number of Republicans, an extraordinary number of folks think that Democrats are a greater threat to democracy than Republicans are. This is why the truth matters. This is why the repetition of the truth, however it may seem homiletic, it may seem repetitive, it may seem boring, it may seem preachy, but there's a reason we need to keep preaching this. And it's because President Trump is very, very good at flipping these things around. It's part of an authoritarian playbook. It's about mendacity. It's about a big lie. We've dealt with this in American history before. We've dealt with this in European history before. But it's only dealt with if those who believe the truth, which is the opposite of what Trump is saying there, continue to stand up and insist that, as John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. And it is simply the fact that President Biden is defending American democracy with all of its imperfections, and Donald Trump has self-evidently, with the evidence of our own eyes, again and again attempted to undermine it. And so if you are going to stand with Trump because you think President Biden is X, Y, or Z, be very cognizant of what you're doing. You are not just casting a vote for marginal tax rates. You are not just casting a vote for a particular policy. If you do this, you are casting a vote to undermine fundamental American institutions. And it's, as President Biden would say, that's not hyperbole.
That's not hyperbole, and it wouldn't just undermine American institutions. It would destroy American institutions. I'm just going to keep it plain. Jon Meacham, thank you, as always, for coming to the Sunday Show.
Thanks, Jonathan.
It's been a consequential week for reproductive rights in the United States. On Friday, Louisiana's Republican governor signed a bill that would add 2 abortion medications to the state's list of controlled dangerous substances. The bill makes possession of the abortion pills without a valid prescription or orders from a doctor a crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And in an interview with the CBS Pittsburgh affiliate, Donald Trump hinted that he might consider future restrictions on birth control.
Do you support any restrictions on a person's right to contraception?
Well, we're looking at that, and I'm going to have a policy on that very shortly. And I think it's something that you'll find interesting.
Trump later posted on social media that he'll never advocate for restricting birth control, but Democrats aren't buying that. Almost immediately after Trump's interview aired, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that he'll hold a Senate vote next month on the Right to Contraception Act, which would establish federal protections for all legal contraception. And looming on the horizon are upcoming decisions on two abortion-related cases before the Supreme Court. One case pertains to restricting access to the abortion pill mifepristone, and the other could determine whether ER doctors in Idaho are allowed to perform abortions on women in medical emergencies. Both decisions are expected to be handed down in June. Joining me now to unpack all of this is Minnie Timuraju, president of Reproductive Freedom for All. Minnie, as always, thank you very much for coming to the Sunday show. So let's talk about this new Louisiana law. After the governor signed it, he posted a statement on X saying, quote, "This bill protects women across Louisiana." Does it?
No. I mean, this bill makes an already impossible, oppressive state for women and families worse, right? Louisiana has one of the worst outcomes for maternal health already, one of the worst ecosystems of care and childcare in the country. And now they're going to try to lock women into the state and make it hard for them to leave the state, to make it hard for them to access medications that they should legally be able to access in other states, despite Louisiana's abortion ban. It's a wild case, but I think you're going to see more of this as the abortion, movement, as the abortion rights movement, reproductive freedom movement continues to have wins. You're going to see more and more extremist MAGA Republicans trying to restrict access even further.
So then let's talk about Majority Leader Schumer's plan to hold a vote on federal protections of contraception. Will the Right to Contraception Act even pass?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have, you know what, let me take a step back. I was going to say probably not, but you know what? Let's see if Republicans are being sincere. You have Donald Trump out there. I think you know what I think, but we have Donald Trump out there saying he's not going to limit contraception. You have Ted Cruz and Katie Britt even talking about support for IVF. Let's see what Chuck Schumer's doing, what Leader Schumer's doing is really smart. Right now, we're going to call your bluff. We're going to put a right to contraception bill and an IVF bill on the floor. Theoretically, they should have a shot at passing.
Yeah, and yet we saw the immigration bill go down, voted against by people who actually negotiated that.
But that's a great example. It's so important for voters to understand what we're dealing with, right? Republicans can go on Fox News all day. They can talk about what they plan to do and where they stand. But ultimately, we have to put them on the record. And that's the brilliance of this move. And that's why we are supportive and going to be campaigning around these two bills.
All right. So as we all know, there are initiatives going to be on the ballot all over the country in November. Not all of these ballot initiatives are the same, and not all of them would enshrine access to reproductive care. The ACLU of South Dakota says their state's proposed amendment, quote, runs the risk of establishing a right to abortion in name only. Could you tell us what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of debate in the states about what can actually pass and what can be enforceable and what will actually provide relief to citizens. So as we dive into some of these state battles on abortion access in state referendums, you're going to see a really smart and important debate about how to move forward the ball. So in every case, every state, we have a slightly different set of situations, and I think the ACLU raises legitimate concerns.
Let me get you on one more thing. I'm pulling out, the 35,000-foot level, because we've got what's happening in Louisiana. We've got the ballot initiatives in November, but we also know that conservative groups like Project 2025 and what they're doing over there have got they're laser focused on abortion, including a proposal to ban abortion medication nationwide using the Comstock Act, which is it's like a 19th century law. Is it possible that they could actually do that.
Yes, absolutely. Look, we've seen...
And it's a federal law.
It's a federal law. So we already saw in Trump term 1 how much damage they were able to create without a lot of planning, right? They didn't think they were going to win. Now you've got the Heritage Foundation and all these orgs that have come together to create this Project 2025 blueprint. They know what they can do. Now, will it get caught up in court? Perhaps. Will Democrats be able to make an effort to repeal? They should. But the fact of the matter is we've seen Donald Trump and MAGA extremists over and over again in office make good on their pledges to disregard the law and disregard the mores that the rest of us operate on in Washington, D.C. So we should be terrified. We should be very worried. And we should understand that Donald Trump saying he wouldn't sign a national abortion ban, and this is the important part, doesn't actually mean much when his allies and cronies, the folks who are going to put him back in office, have already decided how they're going to do it without Congress.
Enter the Comstock Act. Mini Timuraju, thank you very much, as always, for coming to the Sunday Show.